And we're live. All right. Today on House Advisors Live, I am happy to have Travis Caldwell on here with me. Travis has been in the agency world for over 15 years and is working on cooking something up personally right now. But he's done everything from, um, you know, being in the company and working in operations to leading the company. So thanks so much for coming on the show today, Travis.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, the place that I wanted to start out, and that I like to start out all these honestly, is asking kind of about how you got into the agency world in the first place. What was that? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, my I would imagine it's fairly similar to most. I was on the marketing, so I came up through a marketing track. So my first agency role was in a marketing agency, and at the time they were a design kind of historically more print and kind of traditional marketing mediums, and we're looking to build out a digital practice. And my age now is one of which where you know Facebook actually came out while I was in college. So we were at the kind of the forefront of being able to leverage whether it be blogs and content sites and Facebook and Twitter for increasing brand awareness and driving conversions. So I took a couple different ways to get there, but I actually started out in e-commerce, and I started out trying to help build an e-commerce presence for an outdoor store, and then transitioned into more marketing and specifically email marketing. And I was an early hire at Zulily when they were obviously still around much longer ago. And that email marketing experience in the startup world gave me kind of a taste for what that culture and kind of intensity was like. And then I went to nonprofits and was still kind of continuing to build my marketing skills. And while I loved the mission of that business, it lacked some diversity in what I was looking for. And um, through kind of happen chance, I think is how a lot of these early jobs happen. Was recommended, oh, you might like being more client side, and you might like having a handful of clients to build out and do a lot of different type of marketing for. Uh, I ended up getting a job at Vermilion, which was an agency based out of Boulder, Colorado, where I was living at the time, and was, I think, the second person they hired to help build out their digital marketing practice, and did everything from PPC campaigns to email marketing still and social. And that was really the first bit. And I can't remember now exactly how many clients I had, probably around a dozen, and it was my first taste of being billable and having pretty uh, deadlines that were meant something, right? Because the clients are paying for it. And that's really when I got started. And I fell in love with the ecosystem that is agency life.
That's awesome. Well, I guess one of the questions I have is, everyone learns different big lessons when they go into the agency world. Usually, probably depends around like kind of where their particular strengths are and their specialties. But what are some maybe agency mistakes that you feel like you've seen come up again and again? Um, regardless of which agency you're in, maybe
Hmm.
things that maybe you had to help fix over and over again in each place you were in.
Yeah, I think I feel fairly fortunate that there hasn't been any major glaring, like, oh, we were doing this incredibly wrong at any stage, or in any of the companies that I've been with. But the I think one thing that I do see frequently within the ecosystem is, especially for founder-driven agencies, kind of on the smaller side, they're much more likely to try to be anything and everything for any particular client, right? They're bearing this weight of the stress of the people that are on their payroll and et cetera. And next thing you know, you're offering things that you just don't have the strength in. And I think that truly knowing what your product market fit is one of the mistakes that I do see folks make, where and my most of my experience now, once I moved from the marketing side, was in custom web development. And custom web development is one of these scenarios where you can write code a lot of different ways. You can use a lot of different frameworks. You can use a lot of different base open source, or enterprise scale things. And so if you're letting the market dictate your what tools you're using or what platforms you're using, all of a sudden you could have a dozen clients all on different code base stacks that you now have to maintain and are responsible for, and you've stretched your team super super thin. So knowing, even if it's just not saying, hey, we're going to go after one vertical, knowing like our core functionality, our core team strength is X, and we're
Mhm.
going to stick to that, is a really hard thing to do. I think that takes a lot of self control, especially if that new potential client is a client you've always dreamed about working with. And it's hard, right? If Nike walks in the door, you're probably going to try to figure out how to close that deal. So I think that's definitely one, and then maybe on the operational side, really just that the understanding of the people. And I think smaller agencies really get this right, where they're hiring more senior people. They're really understanding that the deliverable to the client is a byproduct. What the client is really buying is the intellect of the people within that organization, and the rapport and the relationship that they have with, whether that be the founder or whoever it may be on their team. And those are really tricky. How do you develop people? How do you make sure you're not scaling up and scaling down when these are people that you need to have be very very core to your product. um, and then I don't know, maybe the last one would be, everyone's a salesperson in an agency life. I think, I've talked to a lot more recently founders, CEOs of other agencies, and they're always asking, "What's the magic bullet for growth? How do you control the throttle?" Uh, and I think some of that is, there is no magic bullet. You have to have a very, you have to have a smart go-to-market strategy, and you have to have a smart annual strategy for how you're going to approach growth. But everybody is essentially responsible for growing and selling your services. And so, how do you enable, a junior developer, a junior designer, or marketer to also be out there driving referrals, driving growth? Not that referrals is the only way, but that's definitely a big piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know, like when we talked previously, you had also mentioned that, a really important piece of that is kind of knowing who you are and what differentiates you. Um, I don't know. What are your thoughts around kind of differentiation? I feel like that's a puzzle that a lot of agency founders are always trying to crack.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes back to the people in some sense. So, kind of like I was saying at first, knowing this is our product, this is our service, this is who we work with the best, right? Or this is the technology platform that we build on. And a lot of this is going to get disrupted over the next, if not already, over the next couple of years with all the AI implementation. But um, it is really really tricky to say, okay, how do we differentiate, right? Because it is about the people, it is about the intellectual um, experience that you have, how you approach solving a problem. All of us in the agency world are solving problems. That's what we are hired to do. And how do we approach solving that problem? That's the actual implementation of the solution can be a commodity, right? Especially if you think about writing code, there's a lot of ways you can get code written for a website. Um, but how you approach it is unique to you, and I think that
Hmm.
is, in by and large, what no matter what service you're offering, it is your approach that is the differentiator. And that can be pretty nebulous, especially if you're trying, if you're willing to take on any client at any scale or any size. And so really, I think what I've seen be really well or work really well is, why did you start this company? Why did you found, your agency? Did you do that because you wanted to solve X problem for Y people? And the founder of my previous employer, Bear Group, Greg Bear, he saw I can deliver a CMS to non-enterprise clients through open source technology. And that was unique. That was a new thing at that time, almost 20 years ago, where, if you wanted to have, you had to pay somebody to make anything, right? And there wasn't the Squarespaces and etc. So he kind of always was able to stay true to like, I'm leveraging open source technology to help enable clients who couldn't afford to do this otherwise.
Yeah.
And and kind of grew from there.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Just kind of you got to know what you do best. Um, what do you feel like you know over uh, over the years you've seen mistakes creep up up again and again, um, and you've probably developed kind of some strong opinions, some convictions about how if you were going to start all over, building something from scratch, how you would do things, how you would approach things for yourself. What advice would you give to your former self, or what would you do if you were starting from scratch today?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I think because I've seen so many different elements of agency, what we call the kind of the pillars of running a business, from growth to delivery to people to finance. What I think there's a lot of just figuring it out along the way for early stage agencies. Um, so knowing what you need at the right time, do you need business cards, when you're first thinking about starting your own agency? No, you don't. Like, that's not where you should be focused. Do you need a brand? No, you don't. Like, those are things that you can do. And then, down the road. So how do you know what to do and when? And that's really tricky, especially when, and I think about, I've been talking with some folks recently that are, well, I was a software developer. I was an SEO expert. And then I had the idea that I could do this better, that I had good rapport with clients. I felt like I could sell my services. Next thing I knew, I've got an 8-person company, and I didn't mean to do that. And so, what's the message in there? Being intentional. I think that if you're going to do that and you're going to start out, like, have a 5-year plan, have a 1-year goal and a 3-year goal and a 5-year goal. Don't just, cool, I'm going to see if I can get a couple clients. I mean, I think you can do that, but the then it gets harder to get back to what we were just talking around about, knowing what you're good at, building the team to do that thing, right? If you have those visions, then you're taking the time to do strategic planning. You're taking the time to um, set up forecasts, even if it's for yourself. Hey, I can bill out this much time, and that's this much revenue, and I need to put this much back into the business, right? I don't know how many, not a lot of the founders of agencies that I've talked to, that's where they started. And so whether
Mhm.
that's finding somebody to help with that or working with that, they just kind of, well, we'll figure that out when we get there. Now all of a sudden, instead of doing beautiful design work, which is what your strengths are, you're trying to figure out HR, onboarding software for contractors. Well, that's not your strength.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point where it kind of sounds like the developing that vision is almost a mechanism for helping you to be more proactive in your own agency. Like, I'm not going to let this type of prospect become a client that I know is a bad fit because of my vision for where
Yes.
we want to go. Whereas if
Yeah.
your goal is to just like make sure we get some clients in the door, well, then you're going to end up looking, 5 years later and being like, I'm pulling my hair out because we're jumping around doing a whole bunch of different things for a bunch
Yeah.
of different people, and there's no consistency or pattern to it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like if you want to kind of help your future self, make sure you plan for your
Yeah,
future
yeah.
self.
5 years down the road, founder will be a lot happier if they do things. But that is also hard, right? It's a passion, and um, again, passions of like creating something beautiful or solving problems for clients doesn't necessarily mean sitting down and writing a 5-year business plan. Um, some folks have that, some folks don't, and it's not imperative. I think that there's a lot of agencies out there that are doing just fine, that have never done that. But I think at a certain point that does start to break down, and that point being at a certain size, at a certain revenue or business size, probably right around that 8 to 10 people size. Now all of a sudden, yeah, how do you set up a strategic marketing plan for the year when everything's just kind of scatter plot? Whereas if you're always kind of coming back to that 1 year, 3 year plan, okay, this is where we're going to focus, and this allows for us to focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another thing that I think comes up with a lot of agency founders, I know it's definitely come up, over the last year and a half, with a lot of agencies getting hit hard, just kind of economically, and kind of the macroeconomic climate. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts around kind of new business? Like, what has been your experience in what works, what doesn't work? Do you have any strong uh, convictions
Yeah,
around
yeah. I
that?
like convictions. That's good. Yeah, I think I actually have strong convictions around every element of agencies. Um, yeah, I don't know anybody in the agency world that would look back at 2023 and think, "Yay, let's do that again." I think the hard part is everything works and nothing works all at the same time. It's an interesting. It's not direct to consumer marketing or sales, and it's not B2B sales or marketing either, and it's this really challenging mix where you have to be playing long game stuff, um, whether that be brand recognition and SEO, and be in communities and have partnerships, to short term, and midterm tracks where you're driving PPC campaigns and you're doing social posts, right? And none of it, there's the attribution sometimes, I think, in agencies is what drives most folks crazy, because I do an email marketing campaign to my list, and 2 years from now, that maybe is going to generate something, right? Or we did a really good project for this person, and now they've moved on to another client, potential client, and now they're reaching back out to us again, right? There's no consistent. Well, if you just do X, Y, and Z, and I think that whether you consider kind of paid, owned, earned, I think there's a lot of success for agencies within that model, because at different sizes you can do a different amount, right? You can increase the amount of that you're doing in each one of those elements. um, again, it gets real tricky because, like, well, partnerships can be all three of those things, right? And really, whatever you put your time and energy behind is where you're going to see success. If you're in partnerships, and you don't ever put any time into partnerships or helping generate leads for those partners, they're not going to send you any work. But if you do, they're going to also send you work, and there's going to be reciprocity there, right? And same thing with any ad, any PPC ad person will tell you, right? If you get what you pay, right? You get out of it what you put into it. Um, so I I think it's a really tricky matrix, and I've seen, some years it is one of those, it's owned, that's really doing super well, while the other years those other two aren't doing well, and vice versa. And some years all three seem to be firing on cylinders because of what's going on, maybe it be in the macroeconomics, or um, just whether it's an election year like this year, right? I mean, again, every agency that I know, like, yep, everything's either pretty much on pause or things are dragging their feet because it's an election year. Well, we know that every 4 years that's going to happen. So if we
Yeah,
have a big growth objective for 2024 and then 2028, that's going to be harder.
yeah,
So how do you adjust? How do are those the years that you lean in more on relationships and referrals and your current client base, because net new is going to be harder, or upsells or cross sells, right? And how do you, yeah, I don't know. It's a fun problem to solve for sure.
yeah. It's definitely a dynamic environment. Yeah. Well, I think we're talking about the new business, and with new business means a lot of times you have to hire and you have to kind of solve people problems. Um, and sometimes that's just, figuring out who to get on the bus,
Yeah.
and how to approach that. Have you developed, going back to the convictions question, like what are some of your convictions around what it takes to do that well?
I think kind of bring it all back again to like, what's your vision? What's your mission? What's the problems you're trying to solve? What's the kind of agency you want to be running, right? Because there's a lot of really, really talented people out there that may not be the right fit for your organization. Uh, in my different roles, as became responsible for hiring, even up into the point where I was CEO, I loved being the first person to talk to a candidate, whether that be a 15-minute phone screen or an hour and a half, because we really dug in and we really got to know each other, culturally fit. I wasn't the one doing the technical or the, hey, can you design this well? It wasn't a portfolio or technical interview. It was a cultural fit. Are they the right people? Are they going to mesh with our clients? Are they the brand, right? And they, especially if talk about a project manager, are they going to be the person on the call with a client that represents what we're doing well and knows what they're talking about and can articulate that? So I loved that. I loved being, participating with my directors to say, which resumes look good, and then I'm going to give them a call. And I always felt like, for the candidate, how great to be able to talk to the CEO and or VP of operations as your first interviewer. And I would always like, the reason why I'm here, you can ask me anything. If there's nothing going on in the
Yeah.
business, right? We can talk about healthcare, we can talk about whatever, because that's the seat that I have. I have that visibility. That doesn't mean every agency needs to do that. I think the moral there is more, if you're as you're hiring, right? There's methodologies for hiring, and I think actually having a marketing kind of background helps with recruiting and hiring and getting candidates in the door. I never felt like getting candidates in the door was the hard part. It was the selection of the candidates and getting them down into it. And they're interviewing me and my company just as much as I'm interviewing them. And that was another thing I would always say to them on those calls, because I will, if it's not the right fit, we need to discover that as early as possible, because
Right.
again, writing code is something that we can train, we can teach, right? Or we can build up, we can increase that skill level. Whereas some of the emotional intelligence side of things that we put a lot of value in, and I've always put a lot of value in, are harder to teach. So who's going to be your kind of gatekeeper, right, for the brand? Are they going to, does that person know the team dynamics well enough to be able to say, gosh, that Travis guy, not going to fit in with David and Travis are not going to, they're going to butt heads, so like, let's not pursue that. Whereas if you're always focused totally on the function, you might miss those, and now all of a sudden you've got friction, and again, your product is the people. So um, that was why it was so important for me to always know who the candidates were. And I'm not saying I always got it right,
Yeah.
but then it came back to me, right? And that's easy. And okay, yeah, can they actually now perform the function? Great. Now you go have your technical interviews, you go talk with PMs and directors and etc. But making sure, I think, whoever that is, whether it's the founder, CEO, doesn't, I don't know if it really matters, but they have to have a good enough pulse on the team and the service offering and the clients to be able to evaluate that cultural fit. And I think, I think my theory on it is, if you have somebody who doesn't have that and they're just doing phone screenings and moving people through a progression, that's how you end up with bad cultures, or one of the factors that can lead to
Hmm.
that. Because then you just have people like, well, yeah, they passed the design review policy, or they passed the code review test, so great. Um, and again, I think at different sizes of agencies, you have different problems, right? At 10 or less, that's a different problem on how you solve that. When if you're 50, yeah, it was a little bit harder for me to conduct all
Yeah.
those, uh, but it was still one of the things I enjoyed doing the most.
Well, you mentioned something. I mean, you mentioned it multiple times. Culture fit, and there's been other interviews where I've heard people basically say similar sorts of things, that culture fit is what matters most of all.
Mm,
Um, but I guess one question I have is that something that ends up just being kind of an intuition or a gut feeling sort of thing, or are there things that you found are, I don't know if they're data points or they're indicators that you look at, things like that to
Hmm.
try to identify whether there's a cultural fit? Like, is it
Yeah.
a left brain or a right brain thing?
Yeah, it's a combination. I think there's absolutely been times where I've been interviewing somebody and been like, "This is it. This is the person we need to hire. Like, go hire them." Um, and then there's been other times where it's like, I'm not really sure. So in my interviewing process and questions that I tried to help develop for my directors, what were based on our core values as an organization. I think there were 7 or 8 at the time, and there was a question specifically for each one of those. If integrity was one of our core values. Like, okay, David, where's an example of a time period in your career where you showed high integrity? And or other types of questions like that you can develop to get them talking about, because right, a core value may only be like one word, but then there's usually descriptors after it, and so there's
Mhm.
different ways you can exhibit integrity. And I'm like, well, they said this, but it doesn't actually mesh. So I think some of those are what you know the analytical side, right? Can we check some boxes based on responses to these that then match to that gut intuition feeling? I would also ask questions like, in agencies, especially if you're on a producer side, you're going to have project managers, you're going to have other team members that you're going to be interacting with. How challenges come up. How do you handle those types of challenges? How do you communicate with your team? Um, so really just kind of digging in on what makes them tick. I loved asking questions like, what's your favorite part about being a project manager? Right. And from that response could usually get pretty close to, are
Mhm.
they what type of project manager, or what are their kind of intrinsic elements that drive them. And we also used multiple EQI assessments along the way as well, that helped us to kind of figure out, okay, yeah, this person's going to fit because they have the right kind of mix of emotional intelligence to fit in with the organization. um, yeah, I think those were, it's yeah, definitely a combination of kind of analytics and creativity.
Yeah. Well, that's a great answer. Well, I know that your wheelhouse, or maybe an area that you kind of gravitate towards, is more on the operations side, and we haven't talked a ton about the operations side of an agency business. But I'd love it if there are, going back to the convictions thing, some things that you see as somebody with this operations bent that um, are some things that a lot of agencies may need to consider.
Oh yeah, good question. I think where my head goes to at first is where how I like to operate and kind of approach is really around kind of similar to a sports team. Everybody on a sports team is a player of that sport, and we'll just use baseball because it's the playoffs and it's top of mind. So everybody that's on the field is a baseball player, but they all play very different positions and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. And if somebody's really good at left field, you're not going to move them to first base, right? And you also don't need 3 first basemen. So how do you construct the team to where you have the right players in the right positions? And really that to me is the matter of putting people in a position to be successful. And if you're continually asking somebody to do a task that's just not their strength, therefore not their passion, you as an organization and them as an individual aren't going to maximize their time together. So yeah, everybody could be a design. You could have 4 designers and they're all designers, but one could be really good at, print, and one could be really good at something else. But you're trying to sell one, well, we do design. Okay, great. Well, you can't give that project to this person, and leveraging that and understanding that. And I think those are the things that escalate with scale, right? When you're a sub 10 person agency, well, yeah, I know this person can do this because we're all kind of really core and we're really, really strong and close knit. But as you grow, you know, oh, these 3 developers are, lighter on work, but they're all front end developers, and we only have back end work right now. How are we going to manage that?
Mhm.
Similarly, oh wait, we've got 4 back end, and how are we going to manage that? And always moving those pieces around to maximize that potential. So yeah, I think I think that's kind of well, that's definitely where my head went first, and kind of where I get stuck, I guess, if you will, on like it's not the same, and how do you assess people, and how do you help level people up, and how do you help grow, and then also deliver something amazing to your clients along the way.
Yeah. It sounds like there's definitely kind of like the last thing. There's an art and a science to it. Um, it can be tricky, but and probably with trial and error too. You learn kind of how to do it well, and um, but it's probably not without a couple of missteps here and there.
Oh yeah, for sure, and none of this is there. Yeah, I think that just kind of sums up agencies, right? It's an art and a science, right? We're dealing with people, and back to the baseball analogy, or former founder of the company I was with last, like we used to talk about, you can have an ace pitcher, right? And you could have a Cy Young pitcher, and he's still human, and is still going to go out there and be off the mound in an inning someday. And you're like, well, where did that come from? Because last time he pitched a perfect game, but it's because he's human.
Yeah,
And I think no matter what service you're providing, it is a creative service. And it requires a lot of capacity for being creative, which in agency inertia gets shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And maybe this is kind of another pitfall is, we worked really, really hard to not have our producers in meetings, because we've got timelines and deadlines and et cetera built out based on being able to do 6 to 7 hours of client work a day. Well, if we stack in 3, even 2 hours of meetings, we've set that person up for failure.
yeah,
And that's how you end up with burnout in the agency world. And so how do you keep them, shielded so they can hone their craft and have that time, and recognize that sometimes, like, you just got to go take a walk, and that's when you're going to solve that problem.
yeah. No, that's so true, so true. Well, Travis, this has been super insightful, super helpful. I think a lot of the other agency founders and leaders listening to this will have some good takeaways. Um,
Hopefully.
for folks who want to chat with you more, learn more about what you have going on, can you tell them a little bit more about that and where they can find you?
Yeah, yeah. Easiest way to find me is just on LinkedIn. Look for Travis Caldwell. I mean, we can drop the link in there so that way they can find. But that's probably the easiest way to just reach out, connect with me there for now. I'm. It's pretty timely actually that we're having this conversation, as I'm currently looking at the potential of starting my own agency specifically towards supporting agencies on operations, and helping with forecasting and finances, and high level delivery, and people, and noticing again, especially if you're in that 10 to 15 people, you're like, well, yeah, I don't have a professional development plan yet. I don't even know where to start with that, right? I'm an engineer, I'm a designer. That's not my forte. So looking at noticing that there's some neat opportunity in the marketplace for that, and it's definitely my passion. So uh, thinking about jumping on the bandwagon again.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'll include a link to that, and
Thank you.
we can send some people your way. And yeah, best of luck with that. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, much appreciated. Talk to you soon.
See ya.